I'm going to do the intros because their bios are so impressive, you should really understand this. So Anne was most recently the Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Tech in the prior administration, helped shape U.S. cyber and AI policy at the highest levels. Prior led global intelligence ops for the NSA, senior roles at the Pentagon, and prior to government, senior roles in the financial sector. Today, she advises us. She's a distinguished fellow at Stanford and Royal United Services Institute, as well as a strategic advisor at Johns Hopkins. Is that enough?
Pretty much.
Got a lot going on. Brett spent decades at the center of U.S. foreign policy under 4 White House administrations, including Special Presidential Envoy leading the global coalition to defeat ISIS. Today, he's a special advisor for international affairs for us, partner at Lux Capital, senior advisor at Tidal Partners, global affairs analyst for CNN, distinguished fellow at Harvard's Belford Center and the Atlantic Council. I hope you guys are clear on why we brought them here today. And Brett, you didn't have all that when I started talking to you. You weren't doing all this stuff. I thought we had an agreement.
I had a few things.
Anyway, they're great experts on the topics that we're going to talk about today. So I want to start with Brett. Let's start with Cisco. Why the areas that you're involved with? You're in venture capital. You're in advanced technology, defense technology. You're working with us. How did you choose these areas after you left the White House?
Well, Chuck, it's great to be here. Great to be here with Anne, because we were, just 16 months ago, just down the hall from each other in the White House. So yeah, I worked across 4 administrations, spent a lot of time in war zones, and saw life and death decision-making as presidents were making them. And I'll just give you an anecdote. So 15 months ago, and this is all in the news now because Iran is in the news, bring you into the White House Situation Room, October 1st, 2024, and we had Iran launch 200 ballistic missiles heading towards Israel. And like the movie War Games, you can see the streaks on the screen, and we had prepared a defense for this. We built a coalition. We had destroyers in the Mediterranean. We had Patriot batteries. We had multiple militaries working together. But as that was like a worst case scenario, that many ballistic missiles in the sky at the same time. And as they launch, it's about a 12 to 13 minute flight. And the first 6-7 minutes, there's nothing you can do. And it just struck me in that moment. I've been in the Situation Room, Oval Office with presidents multiple times. Like, we are totally dependent right now on technology working, on technology that was developed over decades and for scenarios, and hopefully you never have this scenario that we're watching unfold in real time. And if those missiles hit, you're going to have thousands of casualties and likely a massive regional war. And so I was in the room with the president and everybody, and just total silence. And it was the first time in a situation like that I actually said a prayer, because you're completely dependent on technology working. And fortunately, when that window opens up, about 3-minute window where missile interceptors engage, the whole screen turns white, you don't know what's happening, the defenses worked. And a lot of lives were saved, and actually stopped what could have been a much larger war. But the speeds are going to increase. You add AI to the mix, the decision-making cycles of machine decision-making, and let's hope we can keep machines out of that kinetic kind of pulling the trigger type decision. But if you look at it as this is going, that's going to be very difficult to do. And so I want to, and by the way, Cisco, a lot of that technology that allowed all those militaries to work together, a lot of that is Cisco. So I think there's nothing, nothing but working with great American companies to make sure that on this life and death dimension, war and peace dimension of everything we're talking about in this room, that we stay ahead. The United States stays ahead, our partners stay ahead, our partnerships. It is so important because this is coming so fast. So that was just one example of a moment that really stuck in my mind, and I'm really proud, Chuck, to be working with you and so many others.
We certainly enjoy working with you, and you've been very helpful. So Anne, let's similar question. Deputy National Security Advisor, Cybersecurity, you and I knew each other really well at that time. How are you applying all that to what you're doing today?
So, similar to Brett, I spent 15 years in the intelligence community, and in that I ran both offensive and defensive operations, right? I led our hacking units, and then I was responsible for standing up our cybersecurity mission. When I came to the White House, what I was struck by pretty quickly was how geopolitics played out in tech and cyberspace. 3 quick examples: Russia, China, and Iran. The evening before Russia invaded Ukraine, the Russian intelligence services conducted a cyber attack on an American commercial satellite company that was providing secure comms to the Ukrainian military. And it was successful. They would have disabled any chance for the Ukrainians to communicate securely. Starlink stepped in and served as a backup. China, we had many conversations about the Chinese have the largest hacking operations of any service in the world. And they've successfully compromised telecoms around the world, pipelines and water systems. And the telecoms are often for espionage. The pipelines and water systems, we believe, are to strategically turn off or disable those capabilities during a period of crisis or conflict, to put pressure on a society, or frankly, just to buy time. Because American service members deploy at the same airports and ports we all use. And if you can just disable those systems for a couple of days in the context of a crisis around Taiwan, China's bought enough time to be successful. And then finally, Iran, right? No surprise that when Iran was brutally countering domestic protests, the first step they did was turn off their internet, right? Both to hide their tracks and to prevent demonstrators from communicating. And it was no surprise as well that when we served in the White House and were grappling with these kinds of issues, one of the set of options we were often looking at was, how do we turn back on the internet, right? What can we do working with often companies around the world to ensure that people who are fighting for liberty can get their voices out? So watching that geopolitics play out, and to Brett's point, I'm a child of refugees. My parents raised me to be deeply grateful for American freedoms and for the opportunity to rebuild lives here. My family is like millions of American families. I believe in America's force for good around the world, and ensuring that the technology that underpins our commerce, our national security, is built reflecting that openness is something that's really important to me. And I think as we've had conversations around kind of the role of AI in powering a new generation of cyber attacks, I firmly believe that AI will be fundamental in fighting those at machine speed. It's become a machine fight. Yep. And I think the data, models, and frankly, the global visibility that Cisco has is really unique to that fight.
So Anne, this AI competition, I mean, what you just described would suggest that it is a race. It's a massive race going on. And it struck me, we talked about adversaries. G2 was talking about adversaries, I think, in maybe one of the interviews we did this morning, and how they're using AI. And they're not being cautious. We're talking about guardrails and risks, and we're thinking about what are the implications of how we use it. And they can just keep trying and trying and trying until they find something. So this global AI race, it really is a race, isn't it?
It's an interesting question, because the definition of winning tends to vary country by country, right? And this was the big debate in the Biden White House and transferred over to the Trump White House in terms of how do we win? And I think what we've seen is, if you look across, 3 different countries, 3 different approaches to winning. In terms of America, we're winning in terms of having the most advanced models on reasoning, in terms of breakthroughs. Certainly in building out the infrastructure around the country, largely closed models. Mm-hmm. I think when you look at China's often 7 to 8 months behind, but really scaling on applications. Their AI plus national plan is focused on industrials and in manufacturing. And then when you look at India, it's often small language models focused on what that country needs. Like, for example, language models that work across 20 different dialects, 20 different languages, 100 different dialects, enabling a country to actually communicate. Mm-hmm. I think the interesting space to watch is in the key drivers of our economy and national security, is the world running on American tech? So in the space I watch that I think most concerned about is the space of embodied AI, because China has so much manufacturing data and expertise, and converting that into robots is clearly an area that they're working to scale. So between America and its partners, focusing on that, on gaining the data, simulating it so we can generate models to drive robots will be key.
It's really a great point. Brett, I'll come to you on this because we believe, there's a big debate, but we believe that we want the world running on US tech at the end of the day when we're doing these things. And you had Tarek up here earlier. We built a great partnership with in the Middle East, and you've been involved in helping us there. But how do you think the US should think about partnerships, particularly on the tech front, with countries that we may not align from a values perspective even per se, but strategically they're super important? How should we think about it?
I think a couple things. I've never seen an issue jump to the top of the national security agenda as fast as AI, and with something that is clearly going to stay there. It is bipartisan. It is, I mean, this really started in like 2022. I mean, Anne was doing it, but it got to where if you're having a meeting with a president and a head of state, AI is one of the top 3 issues. I'm looking at Tarek and our, the Middle East conversation, completely transformed from the standard issues of energy and extremism and counterterrorism and national security to AI is right at the top. And this gets to your point, Chuck, because as this kind of leapfrogged and as the technology advanced so rapidly, which has been discussed here on this stage today in recent years, we had to think about how to adapt to that and ensure that important countries in the world are partnered with us in our ecosystem, and we're also protecting our technology. And that can be hard to do. So a lot of conversations, again, because Tarek's in the front row, but with Saudi Arabia, with UAE, was really about this conversation. UAE in particular, we had very intensive discussions in the White House in the Biden years. I actually led a delegation out early to talk about access to our technology comes with these safeguards. And this is new because the technology has advanced so rapidly, and certain countries are playing in a stratospheric zone that we used to think maybe it's only us and China. And so what we did was we worked through the Commerce Department, we worked with people like Anne, to basically develop certain guardrails about our national security, say here's what you need to agree to in order to access certain areas of our technology. And frankly, I found those conversations went extremely well, and we were able to get done what we had to get done. So what worries me in Washington sometimes is there is a zero-sum dimension to this conversation in some quarters. That, well, as exactly as you said, Chuck, country X, country Y, country Z, maybe they don't align with us in this area or that area, so therefore we're actually not going to allow access to certain parts of our technology stack. The problem with that approach is that those countries are not sitting static. This revolution is ongoing, this transformation is ongoing. They are going to be a part of it. They're going to invest in it massively. And it's going to be with us or without us. So it is not zero-sum. It's complicated. There's a huge discussion in Washington. And I think it'll be kind of define some aspects of the national security debate as we look at getting into election seasons. But I'm a big believer in we need partnerships here. Partnerships are key. We cannot win. Anne said you could define what win is, but we cannot compete without partnerships. Partnerships is America's competitive advantage in the world across every aspect of diplomacy, national security, commerce, trade. It is partnerships, and in this field, it's exactly the same.
Yeah. Thank you, Brett. You and I have been involved in a lot of these discussions in Washington, have we not? And let me come back to you, and I want to go down the security front because all the customers we have here in this room and those that are watching online, you've been advising, even in the last, say, 14 months, you've been advising governments around the world on issues of cybersecurity. We talked about trust, we talked about the impediments to deployment of AI. Just in general, what's your top of mind guidance to these customers about how they should be thinking about cybersecurity in today's world?
Absolutely. So AI fundamentally is a driver of so much innovation. You just look at drug discovery, right? Coming up with proteins that nature doesn't have to target specific disease pathways. So we have to be using AI. The key is how do we use it safely? And in the context of cybersecurity, I think there's really 2 types of risk to think about, right? One is in the context of, Anthropic published a report saying China had used AI to automatically and at scale conduct attacks. I'll be candid, for most of the cybersecurity community, we all looked at that and went, Of course. Attackers always adopt tech. Frankly, they adopt tech faster than defenders. So I thought what was really interesting about that report was that Anthropic actually used their models to find, analyze, and actually block the attack. Now, in that case, the attackers were faster. That's what needs to change. Because so much about cybersecurity today is manual and painful. I recall after China compromised a number of American telecoms, and I talked to one of the major chief operating officers and said, help me understand how they hid for potentially up to 3 years. And his answer was, and we have software-defined networks today, they're changing all the time. So we have a hard time defining normal. And if we can't define normal, it's really hard to define anomalous. And anomalous is the first step to figuring out what's potentially malicious. AI can change that and do it at speed, because you can define what's normal in a network, alert what's anomalous but akin to before sports games, so you're surging traffic to a particular place. Yep. Or frankly, and I think that's what's unique also about companies like Cisco, you have a global platform. So when an attack technique is done in one place and you're using AI to track that, you can alert to a second telecom, hey, this thing's anomalous, we saw it somewhere else. And I think that's why the open source AI model actually that Cisco released was so interesting, because there's this unique data that global companies have about what's globally normal and anomalous that can then serve individual entities to help them then, for their particular business, refine that. So the AI's role in traditional cybersecurity is huge in that it's now become a machine-on-machine fight, and human defenders just don't stand a chance. Yeah. And then there's the AI of the models themselves. Right. And there's really a lot of, first, I think, because these are closed-loop systems, there's an opportunity to use AI to help them, to simulate different kinds of attacks and really secure the models. What excites me hugely is, as a former programmer, is the opportunity to actually use AI to find vulnerabilities in code and fix them. And there's various projects, OpenAI, Cisco's CodeGuard, that are actually doing that. So I think across the different types of cybersecurity challenges today, AI is a risk, but it's also transformative in enabling.
It's the only way we ultimately stop them. It's the only way, right? Yeah. So Brett, we talked a little bit about countries and how we should be deploying tech and using tech. And Anne, I'd love your take as well. But we think about policymakers. I always say, look, I feel really bad for people in Washington who are trying to regulate technology because, first of all, for all of us in this room, we live this every day, and we're trying to keep up with it. And I mean, we're in the middle of it. And yet, in Washington, we have this expectation that these people should just be geniuses and they should be able to regulate it intelligently at the pace that it's moving. So talk about regulation, and then what misunderstandings do policymakers have right now relative to how they're thinking about this technology?
I think in some ways it's worse than that. Again, I'll just speak from my personal experience.
I was going to let you say that.
But I mean, so Anne and I, again, worked in the White House. We work in something called a SCIF. It's a secure, our office is a secure compartment. It means you can't bring your phone into our offices. So we don't work with our phone. On your desktop, we would have 3 screens, 3 systems, one unclassified, which anybody has, one a secret system, one top secret, and frankly, most of our work is done on a top secret system. So I have to say, honestly, before I came out of the White House about a year ago, I was not using AI tools because I rarely had my phone at work, and those tools are not available on our systems. And I think Aaron mentioned earlier with G2 about issues in the knowledge economy on access. And so in grafting those systems onto the type of information Anne and I would be dealing with every day, which is our most sensitive collection, our most sensitive information, and we just don't have the AI tools, and I think it'll be a while until they're really there. I also now realize how helpful it would have been if I could have had a model on my top secret system to help me think through a problem. So the point I'm trying to get at, Chuck, is that it is a dialogue between real expertise here out in Silicon Valley and with people who are making these decisions every day and dealing with it. We're not actually using the tools because you can't. So, but then it gets in even more complex when you get into Congress and politics, and it gets back into this zero-sum nature. So you start seeing calls for freeze everything, no more data centers. I mean, this is actually a policy position coming from some aspects in Washington, just make it stop, and that's not realistic. So this is a really tough question, Chuck. I think what is important, I spent 2 years out at Stanford in 2019, 2020, and it was COVID time, part of it, but it was just when this, people in this room know more than me, but it felt like the crossover from, you know what, we have to have a better conversation between policymakers in Silicon Valley. And now you have institutions like Hill and Valley Summits and things which I think are really important. The Trump administration has tried to break down a lot of these silos, which is important. But no, it's, you're asking a question, it is critical, because if you get the regulation wrong, and you're dealing with a competitor like a breakneck competitor like China, we can really be left behind. So it's a key question. It's why summits like this are so important, and a lot of stuff going on in Washington right now is so important. And just keep in mind, those of you doing it every day, people like me are, Anne exception, she's a real expert, we're not using the tools every day that people do in the national security work. So it's, sometimes a demo doesn't really give the real impression of how useful these things are. I use them all the time now in my personal life. I was not when I was in the White House.
And you have anything to add?
No, it's so interesting. When AI came out and the awareness of the huge opportunity and the attendant risks, what you saw was some policymakers looking at it and saying, we have to address the risks. But there's a risk of doing, and there's a risk of not doing. And that was a similar approach to like foreign partnerships, right? For some, they viewed America's leadership in chips as, frankly, a way to constrain the advancement of the technology and maintain American leadership. For others, we say, look, we want as many countries around the world, citizens around the world, to benefit from this technology. Let's think in a very focused way on some of the specific risks. So if you think about some of the specific risks, right, there's the risks that an adversary will use it faster in their military and intelligence communities. Mm-hmm. To give a quick example of what I mean, one of the threats the intelligence community grapples with is advancements in North Korea's missile program, right? North Korea is an isolated regime, heavily sanctioned, and they continue to make massive investments in their missile program, and they use it, right? They shot a missile over Japan to kind of threaten the region. Now, some may say, why are we caught by surprise? Many of those missiles are launched by mobile launchers. So for the intelligence community, there's constantly what we call indications and warnings of the kinds of things we watch to see, will there be a surprise missile launch to alert forces to defend against it? So they look at things like, okay, the people involved in this program, are they going to new places they haven't gone before? Mm. We know some of the locations are often near, water or other kinds of, mountains, so they're hidden. So you may watch those closely, but fundamentally you're bringing together video, satellite imagery, signals, voices imagery, as well as others in a combined picture. Today, that's often still done manually in the intelligence community. Anybody here is automatically going to multimodal AI, right? Of course. So that transformation and which military or intelligence community do that first does give an edge. So that's a risk. And my view, the biggest way to approach that is deploy. Deploy carefully, ensuring that it's in compliance with legal and policy rules, but deploy quickly. Other risks are, will AI be used to conduct new types of cyber attacks, develop new types of biological weapons? When one thinks carefully about the kind of controls, then we can actually make progress. But I think it needs to get into that detail of bringing AI experts, subject matter experts like bio experts together to come up with the right set of regulations. That takes time. And I think the key piece we always have to repeat is when there's so much innovation, there's risk with every regulatory step we take. So let's be as precise as possible, addressing the precise risks as possible.
All right, so we're almost out of time. We're going to do a real quick one from both of you, okay? Because there's an outside chance that some of these topics could be depressing.
Really?
So let's leave with some hope. So Brett, let's start with you. Give us something to be optimistic about.
No, at risk of being a cliche here, we have the most incredible country. And seeing in my year kind of out of national security world from the inside, seeing it from the vantage point of Cisco, seeing it from the vantage point of venture and our entrepreneurial ecosystem, it was just so extraordinary. And we just need to continue to nurture and invest in that and make sure that it continues to be able to, that's what makes America so special. It is amazing. And so having some exposure to that over the last year leaves me quite optimistic.
Give us hope, Anne.
Brett put it beautifully. You know, there's a lot of talk about the role of voice models and deep fakes. A number of years ago, my husband and I we love tech, and we got involved with tech helping people with disabilities. So there's a nonprofit that essentially does voice banking for people, ALS patients. So as they are diagnosed, they bank their voices, and as unfortunately the disease progresses and they lose their ability to communicate, the models help them. They blink their eyes, it's converted to particular letters and words, and they're still able to communicate with their families. So of course, AI brings risk. But you think about examples like that across so many areas where it's making a difference in individual people's lives and families, and it's just a moment of excitement as well.
All right, I'm hopeful again. Thank you so much. Thank you, too.